Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. Leon Hartwell. I am the Senior Advisor of the Central and Southeast Europe Program at LSE Ideas. Before we start, I'd like to thank all our partners, the Jagiellonian University, Babeș-Bolyai University, and last but not least, the Ratiu Forum, of course. And I'd especially like to single out my colleagues from the Ratiu Forum for all your contributions and for making sure that our guests are picked up and you're feeding us delicious desserts. Everyone from Pamela to of course Jeddah, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for your hospitality. Now I'd like to welcome everyone to the conference, Democracy in the Age of Putin. And the age of Putin is a period that extends to a time well before the February 2022 escalation of the Russia-Ukraine war. And in fact, it may even be a period that preceded that period before Putin came to power. And in 1997, Fareed Zakaria published a very profound article called The Rise of Illiberal Democracy. And at the time, he wrote this article when several states around the world became democracies. Now, while some analysts were still high on the end of history thesis, Zakaria cautioned that around the world, democratically elected regimes are routinely ignoring the limits on their power and depriving citizens of basic freedoms. He also added that from Peru to the Philippines, we see the rise of a disturbing phenomena, illiberal democracy. Moreover, Zakaria warned that it's wrong to celebrate multi-party democracy without a parallel emphasis on strengthening of liberal institutions to constrain government's power. According to Zakaria, democracy without constitutional liberalism is producing centralized regimes, the erosion of liberty, ethnic competition, conflict, and war. He also pointed out that states that have practiced constitutional liberalism have often transitioned into democracies, but the opposite is rarely true. In essence, Zakaria draws a line between democracy and constitutional liberalism. The former concept is usually linked to the idea of free and fair elections and the existence of multiple political parties. Constitutional liberalism is much deeper as it promotes individual liberty and the rule of law. Zakaria also referenced Samuel Huntington to support his argument. The famous Harvard political scientist claimed that governments produced by elections may be inefficient, corrupt, short-sighted, irresponsible, dominated by special interests, and incapable of adopting policies demanded by the public good. These qualities make such governments undesirable, but they do not make them undemocratic. Now, what if elected leaders are bigots, racists, or genocidaires? In 1997, after 7 years of civil war, Liberia's Charles Taylor was democratically elected as the president of his country. One of his notorious election slogans was, "He killed my ma, he killed my pa, but I will vote for him." Instead of putting an end to the fighting, Taylor expanded it into a regional conflict, using child soldiers and killing thousands. Taylor is perhaps an extreme example, but the lesson learned is that an election by itself will not solve political problems unless it is accompanied by strengthening the rule of law and institutions that limit government access. Now, since Zakaria published his profound article, a lot has happened. Putin came into power in 2000, and he has shown absolutely no sign of leaving office. Russia is arguably becoming a totalitarian state. But it's not just states lacking deep democratic transitions that are decaying. On January 6, 2021, following Donald Trump's electoral defeat, a mob attacked the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. Their objective was to maintain Trump in power by preventing a joint session of Congress from formalizing the victory of President-elect Joe Biden. Ladies and gentlemen, beyond DC and Moscow, democracies around the world are in deep trouble. According to the Economist Intelligence Unit's Democracy Index, democratization suffered more reversals in 2021, with the percentage of people living in a democracy falling to well below 50% and authoritarian regimes gaining ground. Similarly, Freedom House's latest Freedom Index reported, "The present threat to democracy is the product of 16 consecutive years of decline in global freedom. A total of 60 countries suffered declines over the past year, while only 25 improved. And as of today, some 38% of the global population live in not free countries, the highest proportion since 1997. Only about 20% now live in free countries." Now, today and tomorrow here in Turda, I hope we will spotlight more of these issues that are so central to Zacarias' The Rise of Illiberal Democracy. But before that, I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Nicolae Ratiu, Chairman of the Ratiu Family Foundation, for some opening remarks. I thank you all and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Good morning, and let me add my welcome to what Leon has said to our friends from Poland, from the Jagiellonian University, from Serbia, from United Kingdom, and homegrown Romanian guests and speakers we have here. Welcome to you all. It's a great pleasure to have such a wide international range to discuss what we have on our agendas today. After that introduction from Leon, I'm not quite sure what I have left to say, but I was thinking how with Gorbachev passing away a few days ago, that it's interesting that we wouldn't actually probably be sitting here today in Turda, in Romania, and having been able to have these kind of discussions if he hadn't come to power and had enabled a peaceful transition. Except in Romania, there was blood spilled, but in all the other countries, there was a peaceful transition, basically, to different versions of democracy, but or in our case, what we still call transitional democracy, which is probably still in the case of the others, and many of the others. But nevertheless, his failure, I suppose, to be determined to dismantle communism, but instead to reform communism, led to the chaos that we had that they had in Russia in the 90s, and brought about the arrival, even the need for a strong arm leader, Putin. So Putin was chosen, and here we are today with him, and we see what's happened. And we talked a lot about dystopian futures yesterday, and we have not a dystopian future. We actually have a dystopian present now, thanks to what's happened. Of course, it was given Putin's KGB background. Anybody who knows how the KGB works. My wife is Ukrainian, and she grew up in that world, and is thanks every day, the day that she left back in '87, but was very much aware of the power and influence of KGB. We talked yesterday. I have a professor. A Romanian professor who talked about the Romanian poets foreseeing in the very early 90s, foreseeing difficulties in the future of Romania. And I'm wondering if in the early 90s the Russian poets did the same thing. I'm not sure. I'm sure there are people here who know about, who can comment on that. What we're facing now is really an existential battle between democracies, which, as Leon was saying, and as we've been talked about over the last couple of days, and I'm sure we'll talk about more today, with democracies which are in a bad shape, if you like. They're weakened through complacency and decaying in some respects. There are reasons for that. That actually, some of the reasons coming from the strength of democracy, which is democracy has the ability, or in its system, to self-correct. But the danger in that, especially in our social media world, where we're bombarded by all sorts of, whether it's Facebooks, Instagrams, Twitters, and so on. Anybody's opinion gets out there. It's much more interesting to criticize, or it's much easier to criticize than to celebrate. Let's say criticize the weaknesses, the faults of democracy, rather than sing the praises of the strengths of democracy, and which obviously gives the opening to democracy's enemies, whether that be Putin or China, to challenge and to get into those weaknesses and exploit those weaknesses to undermine democracy further. That's the battle that we're facing, and it concerns me and many of us. The weaknesses in much of Europe still today. We in Romania, Poland, the Baltic states, we're in the front line, and so I think we're far more aware, for historical reasons as well, far more aware of Russian aggression and what it can do to a nation. And we've all, I don't think I didn't live under it, but because I lived in the West, but there are plenty of people here who did live under the regime, the communist regime, and know exactly what it's like. So we'll find out more about that. I've been in the south of France before coming up here, and I was conscious of the kind of comments that I was hearing from an Italian who said, "Why, what's it all for? Why are we fighting a war for Ukraine? It's Ukraine. We're Italians." And I had a Frenchman who said, "Do you know that there's one winner in all of this? It's the United States." What are you talking about? Yeah, he said, the United States, they're making a fortune out of this. They're selling their gas, they're selling their oil to Europe. Meantime, European economies are falling into recession. Even Russia is suffering from sanctions. To which I said, well, if you take a purely economic view, I suppose that's right, but I don't think that's a workable or an acceptable attitude whatsoever. It's like actually an Englishman, maybe even more annoyed. He said that he thought that Boris Johnson was as bad as Putin. I said, okay, you can not like Boris Johnson, but that is the most ridiculous comment I've ever heard. Anyway, listen, I won't talk any more because I want to hear the experts. But I will say one thing, which I'd very much like to see coming out of this, is how can we marshal arguments better and more effectively to persuade the wavering European states to stiffen their backbone and understand and agree and back the continuing support of Ukraine against this autocratic regime, which is going to get into our whole European society if we let it happen. They'll get in through all the systems that they know, through corruption, through infiltration, through threats, through bribery. You see how Hungary is bribed to join Putin. And unfortunately, I think there will be more. There will be wavering this winter, and that's what I'm saying. We need to think of. I was not a Brexit supporter, but for instance, in Brexit, they came up with a slogan: "Take back control," and people bought into that. And I thought, yes, great idea. I mean, it's not as simple as that in what we're facing with Putin, but as I said, the argument needs to somehow get across to strengthen the rest of Europe. So let's start talking more about it. Age of Putin, democracy in the age of Putin. Thank you.